Hey, thanks so much for tuning in to Respect Her Game. If you're enjoying this show, be sure to check out Nessun's daily sports podcast, Boston Has Entered the Chat. You can listen on Apple, Amazon, Spotify, and wherever else you listen to your podcasts. What is up? I am Annabelle Hasselbeck here with Kasey Hudson, and this is Respect Her Game. We have a very fun show for you all today. We finally get to go through the Women's March Madness bracket. We'll talk PWHL, NWSL, but first, a little funny story. We're recording this on St. Patrick's Day, and Kasey and I both showed up in green, naturally. So Kasey has the most beautiful green on, very much so like a green screen. So we had to do a little studio switch up, but we made it work.
I know. At least we had the opportunity and option to switch things up, because the shock when we realized that we were not going to be looking properly for any of this was quite comical. So we're off to a stellar start. It was good stuff.
But that was like the first thing I learned as a child. Like on St. Patrick's Day, you have to wear green or you're going to get pinched. And I walked in and saw your awesome green outfit. She even has amazing green boots that match. And I said, oh, Kasey, like I didn't even wear green today. And then I unzipped my jacket. I was like, I actually did randomly. So thank you to our producer, Ethan, for helping us out making the switch. But here we are. Kasey, how was your weekend?
Oh my gosh, it was such a good weekend. And for me, the weekend kind of started on Thursday. I had the absolute honor and opportunity of moderating the Red Sox Ambition to Action female panel. So we got to meet the assistant GM for the Boston Fleet, Megan Turner, fabulous story, Nicole Federico, VP of Marketing and Content for the Celtics. I mean, just so many brilliant women and names, which is super intimidating, but there was just the movement of it all. They were so vulnerable, they were so authentic, they were so honest. So it turned from like a networking panel to this just like hangout, you know what I mean? And you're chit-chatting with these like powerful women, these important women who you just realize are just as human as you are. So that kicked off my weekend. I run from Fenway to the airport because I forgot my friend was flying in from New York. So that's something with this life, is scheduling and timing. So she texts me, landed, and I'm like, oh, yes, I will be there in 30 minutes. I didn't get there for like an hour and 15, but thank God she's so patient. She reads a lot of books. She had her work laptop, so we were good. Grab her from there. And yes, had my friend from NYC in, and we did some exploring. We just went to Tate. We did the exploration of Harvard campus because we're both big nerds about that. We love a good bookstore, so we spent way too much money on books. Then we went to the Bruins Lightning game because, as y'all know, torn home gal. That was a hard one for me.
Exciting, though.
But I wore Bruins gear, and I stuck out with them, even though it was a tough game to get through. So, yeah, it was a very adventurous, very exciting, very prominent weekend for the books.
Yeah, that's a big weekend. You got to meet a lot of awesome women in the Boston area too.
Yes.
And then to bring your friend into it sounds so fun. But yes, you have to wear the Bruins gear in here in Boston, and exciting that your friend got to be along for the ride.
Oh yeah, and plus like to come in on St. Patty's weekend, and like I got to talk to George about it, and of course Chloe knows because she's an old friend of mine, but everyone kept texting me like, what are you doing in like one of the best St. Patty's celebratory towns? And I was just like, I'm figuring it out. Like I just moved here, but like plot twist, my grandmother was born in Ireland, so like there's a requirement
yes, you have
to actually celebrate it. Yeah, but I don't think I did it quite as much justice, but for me still learning a new city, I did quite a bit. But what did you do this weekend?
Well, I actually had a bridal shower being hosted at my house on Sunday.
Yes.
So it was a ton of fun. So it was during all the parade and everything, but I was like, you know what, I'd rather be celebrating my cousin who is getting married. So it was super fun. It was breakfast at Tiffany's themed.
Love it.
She was actually the lacrosse manager for our Boston College Women's lacrosse team. So it was really cool for me to have 1 year with her on the team. It was when we won the national championship. So it was funny, you know, we had a photo of ourselves doing like our national championship rings, and I was like, let's do it again with your ring and my not ring. You know?
My not ring.
So I just love that, and super fun to celebrate her. But great weekend.
Yes, it sounds really good overall. I did see the post about it, and I was like looking at the colors, and originally you gravitate to think, is it breakfast at Tiffany's? And then you're like, whatever, the colors are just fantastic.
You know, it works for all things, but she's a classy girl, so we had to do it.
It works perfectly.
Another exciting thing is we finally get to talk about women's college basketball in the March Madness bracket. So let's just go through through these seedings that we have right here. Starting at number 1, we'll just go through the top 10 because I know there's a lot of teams that made this tournament. Number 1, UCLA Bruins. Not a huge surprise, but we know who's probably not thrilled about it is number 2, South Carolina, and we'll get to this in a minute about what all Dawn Staley had to say. Number 3, Juju Watkins and USC. And I say Juju and USC because Juju really single-handedly pulled her team into it and defeated and handed UCLA, number 1, their only 2 losses of the regular season. Number 4, Texas Longhorns. Number 5, UConn Huskies. Number 6, Notre Dame, ACC represent. Number 7, LSU. At 8, TCU. And then number 9 and number 10, more ACC teams. We have NC State, who's coming for vengeance after they lost the ACC tournament. And number 10, the Duke Blue Devils, who ended up winning the ACC tournament, which was not what people were thinking. And so those are our top 10 teams. But I do have to quickly shout out the other teams, the 6 new teams in the March Madness tournament. We have 6 brand new teams. William & Mary making their first tournament appearance, just one of the 6, which is so wild and just fun, too, to have a new group of teams and a new fan base in this. But let's just get to these top 1-seeded teams. We have UCLA, South Carolina, USC, and Texas. So, Kasey, when you see UCLA at the top of this team, what are you thinking?
Oh, I'm thinking that it's going to be interesting to see how they move getting this number 1 seeding, especially because you mentioned it. USC has been one of the only teams to kind of humble them a bit throughout the season. But these seedings are so important because the path to the championship is dictated so heavily by it. So I hope that UCLA doesn't come into this because they were humbled by just one team. They felt like they needed to be in this number 1 spot. But I feel like you and I talked about it last episode, especially when we were comparing some of the other teams here, like not having that perfect approach, not having that perfect setup or that perfect seeding. It mentally prepares you for adversity. It mentally prepares you for like almost an underdog mentality so that you can show up differently all the time. So not to say UCLA can't do that, but I think that they had a chip on their shoulder all season long. One team really kind of gave them a way to go. So I can't wait to see what their mental approach is going to be to all of this.
Definitely. And they did beat South Carolina in that head-to-head early season. Mm-hmm. So when you look at it that way, I know people are saying, oh, why not SC? But when they went head-to-head, they did come out with the win. But it is crazy, too, to see that they're in the Spokane region. And I thought this was an interesting take that if they do go to the Final Four, which they most likely will, they'll have to travel to Tampa. And, even though it's just that one flight down there for the Final Four and it's exciting, it still could be part of it. It still matters. And so I thought it was interesting because I wonder if the NCAA can just make like a mileage maximum or something for these teams, because the other side of the bracket is Birmingham, right? And so that's a very different travel schedule and all the things, and it goes by really fast. So I just thought that was interesting looking at UCLA's path, but they've also been competitive in their 2 losses, right? Yeah. And whereas South Carolina, I think they lost by like 29 to UConn. And so that was something that the NCAA was looking at, is if you do lose, like, what is the loss like? Right. And also, in retrospect to how are the other teams doing when you do lose? Like, when you fall, how are the other teams doing in that? And I think the NCAA was calling this an interaction effect. It's not just what happened with the other teams, it's what other teams are doing on their own. So super interesting just to hear what all went into the March Madness seeding, but definitely feels like UCLA deserved this number 1 seed.
Yeah, I mean, their record shows for it. And then just kind of like on the South Carolina front, I mean, we've mentioned the fact that some of these like SEC, ACC, the scheduling is just presents a different difficulty, challenge, and issue. So that's going to be the fun part. And then especially you mentioning the mileage that plays a role into this. Like, you're going coast to coast. The biggest thing that it messes with is the lactic acid in your legs. Like, are you going to be able to have the same pace to manage the court and to have your highest level of game be played and committed? And then you're going against teams where ACC is coming into this as kind of overlooked and underappreciated. They've had some pretty tough matchups in games within their conference and stuff. So that's where you can end up at the end of this, or towards the end of this, see where all these little things and unique details kind of like add up. And this is why we always see an underdog kind of sneak into the mix and top teams get taken down one way or another. So I'm excited. I think the seeding did well.
Definitely. It's so interesting that you just brought up even just like the lactic acid, right? Because your post game, how you cool down after games really matters. And I know for my college team, we would take a lot of care of our body after the games. And it would be even heightened when we get into the postseason because you have less time to recover in the tournament play. You're playing back-to-back games.
Right.
And it's such an important. So I'm interested to see, what teams are able to thrive in the postseason basketball. And most likely it's going to be the teams that have all that experience, who have been here before and done it. But a coach and a team who have really stuck their neck out after seeing the seedings and watching the March Madness bracket go down was Dawn Staley in South Carolina. So here is Dawn Staley's reaction to being seeded number 2 overall.
I looked back and I saw that they didn't react. I don't even think they knew they were on television. So, and then once they were, they played it cool. I'm a little bit of surprised because we manufactured our schedule to put ourselves in a position to be the number 1 overall seed. And I do think if you do, the blind test and you put our resume against any other team in the field, I think you'll pick us. That's just plain and simple. I'm going to speak on it tonight, and it's not going to be a motivation for us moving forward. It's hard enough to win a national championship. We don't need a chip on our shoulder. We do need to voice it. I do need to voice the fact that we put a schedule together. We got the most quad wins, and if having more quad 1 wins doesn't supersede some of the hiccups that we had during the season, I don't know what will. So for us, maybe we don't put ourselves in a position where we have hiccups, so we aren't, they don't have to lower the standard for us to get a number 1 overall seed.
I loved how she said, we don't need this chip on our shoulder. She was like, I know I'm complaining about this in a sense, but that's not going to motivate us. We have enough to motivate us already with how hard it is to win a national championship. But I do like how she just said, we did manufacture our schedule to be able to be in this position. And yes, we had hiccups earlier in the season, but are those something that we're going to really fight for when we make our schedule for the next season? Yes. Does it help your team grow? Do you learn from your mistakes? 100%. But you could get that number 1 seeding if you didn't lose those games. So What's your take on what Dawn Staley had to say?
I actually love that she mentioned the manufacturing of the schedule. You and I did talk about this on the last episode of Respect Her Game, because we were talking about the fact of like the complications, the difficulty, the challenges of their schedule, and how it perfectly poises them to compete in a bracket such as this. And that kind of just like tracks back and ties into what I was saying about UCLA. Like they kind of had a pretty blueprint season in terms of like who their opponents are going to be, the teams that are like very mild out there that they completely toppled. So that mental game, as you mentioned for Dawn, how she was just kind of saying like, hey, we manufactured our schedule for such a time as this. More importantly, we made sure that we were going to have to push past adversity to get here, and it prepares them differently and for the mental approach to all of this. So that's why I say like it'll be fascinating to see if UCLA gets a weird test early on in the bracket, but I feel like South Carolina is going to just be so well poised to compete in this year's bracket for that reason specifically, how they manufactured. So yeah, you don't get the number 1 seed, and that was probably the purpose, but it's going to line them up so much differently in terms of like where they get slotted in, who the underestimated and underdog teams are that they are going to face down the line.
Definitely. And there's got to be some frustration as well because of how well they dominated in the SEC Conference Championship. I mean, they rolled over those teams. Texas was number 1, and they handed them the loss. Like it was their job. And so you have to wonder how much the committee took that into consideration, and how probably just they're peaking at the right time. And that's what is the key right here, is that South Carolina is a team that knows how to win in the postseason. They know what it takes. They know how to train their bodies to get to that point in the season as well. You see a lot of teams are suffering injuries, girls who didn't even compete in their conference championships. And so that's kind of that secret factor that Dawn Staley has with this team. And so I have to imagine that them knowing that they're on the right schedule for them as a team, that has to be playing into their frustration about not being the number 1 seed.
Yeah, and just to add to that, something that you kind of just pointed out that's so important, I think we got a peek as to what teams actually have quality depth, because when you've got this traveling going on, when you've got the schedule that March Madness presents, your depth is really what's going to carry you in a number of ways also. And that's something that I felt like we didn't see entirely out of UCLA throughout the season. Your key makers had to be your key makers, but like where was the depth when need be? And that's where this challenge is going to also present and offer to UCLA.
And I think some people are really not freaking out, but a little concerned with Dawn Staley's concern of, hey, if we're going to, make this really hard schedule and manufacture competition earlier in the season, why should it hurt us later down the line? And people are worried because we love fun basketball. We love to watch competitive basketball early in the seasons when you have those number 1 and number 2 matchups like UCLA and South Carolina, and then you have the opportunity for an upset. So that's what makes the sport grow.
Yeah.
And that's what brings more viewers in November, in December, not just in March when we're getting ready for tournament play. So, I hope that we can find the balance of that with these coaches willing to push their teams and to grow the sport, but also doing what's right for their program.
Well, something else that just came to mind while you were mentioning that too is that when you kind of had that front load in the top of the season, especially going against some of the other most competitive teams, think about it. The season changes the DNA of a team quite a bit. So when you meet each other in the beginning of the year, you can't kind of pull on that in the end of the year or the end of the season. You're almost looking at different matchups. So you kind of have an upper hand in the sense to say, like, we felt you out beforehand, but it was so long ago that, like, we're a different team or we have something different to deliver when it comes to the matchup. So that's going to make it that much more, like, competitive and, like, hard to kind of gauge where can this go.
Well, and just as these top-seeded teams are super competitive, we do have 6 new teams in the NCAA tournament. We have William and Mary, Arkansas State, Fairleigh Dickinson, George Mason, GCU, and UC San Diego. And I would just love to highlight GCU women's basketball because this Coach Miller, is so fun. She was doing snow angels on the floor. She was doing the moonwalk after their conference championship. I mean, Kasey, how fun would it be to have this as your head coach?
Are you kidding me? I would definitely play my heart out for her. That's for sure. I didn't catch the snow angel part. I saw the glimmer when she came in and like the Gatorade got dumped on her. I don't know how I took my eyes off the screen after that, but the angels, the water angels, Gatorade angels.
I mean, I think there were like ice cubes in that water too. So
even better.
She had to be so pumped up, but just wanted to shout GCU out because she's done something really incredible with this program. She's gotten the fan base hyped up. I saw her going over to the crowd and, hyping the students up there for their game and just super fun. So not only am I excited to watch these top seeded teams, but also the new teams and the new viewership that we're going to have in this women's college basketball tournament. You can stream the entire Sox season with a NESN 360 annual plan available at an all-new reduced price of just $20 a month paid annually. And for a limited time, get 4 free tickets to Fenway with your purchase. Visit NESN360.com to sign up today. Well, we have some Boston representation in the women's and just in the women's basketball tournament. Out of the women's and men's, only one team from Massachusetts is in the NCAA tournament, and that is Harvard, or should we say Harvard, down the street from here. It's one of 3 teams in the Ivy League that's made the women's college basketball tournament. So exciting, and this is the first time that we have had 3 Ivy League teams in the tournament, and they will take on Michigan State, who's ranked 7 in this tournament in North Carolina and Raleigh on Saturday. So just being an Ivy League team, how do you think Harvard has reacted to getting seeded in this tournament?
They have to be on such an absolute high. And then for one, this is the highest seeding that the program has got. In 2002, they got seeded in at, I want to say 13. And right now they're coming in as a 10 seed. So that alone, just you're riding the high of the accomplishments of being an Ivy League school that can compete and be put on a larger scale and platform, for one. For two, it just speaks to the development of the program. They made the right moves. They brought in the right pieces. They put the right time and effort behind everything. So what a payoff that is. Like, you're making school history. You're coming in slotted higher than you've ever been before. But more importantly, you've got players that are saying it's time to look at us. It's time to look at our school. And it's time to put us in the same athletic category as everyone else and not count us out because of the Ivy League. Because that is tough. Ivy League gets counted out or just kind of put off to the category of their own. Academia-wise, absolutely, but athletic-wise, they need a little bit more respect. So it's going to be a fun tournament to see them kind of have a mark in this. I can just talk from a hockey perspective. There's so many players that never get that look because they come out of Harvard and they're being compared to a BC, BU, Denver, and across the board. So I know Harvard's got to be so freaking proud, but more importantly, excited, and one of those teams that can ruffle some feathers, I hope.
Definitely. Hey, you have to imagine sometimes to people who are scouts or recruiting kids think, oh, well, they went to Harvard. Because they're bummed
Yeah.
that they couldn't go to Harvard or some
Yes.
school. So we're all human. It's got to be part of that. But I think you were referring to senior guard Hermione Turner, because she said, I'm tired of society putting stereotypes on Harvard, Princeton, and Columbia, all these Ivy League schools. We can be also great hoopers. Then she had this line, nerds can hoop too. I've been saying that all year, and I liked her saying that nerds can hoop too, because yes, 100%. And actually, your basketball IQ is probably amazing as well, because you're striving for excellence on the court and off the court. So I love that line from her. I thought it was really funny. But this is a team that has had the most wins in program history. They've had 24 wins this season. They're really on a roll, especially getting to come off of your Ivy League championship just really sets you up for, I think, just positive vibes, good feelings around the locker room, and just a really pumped up team where you feel like, okay, we're coming in on a high note. I think that can really set you up for success going into the tournament.
Yeah, it's gonna level up the morale in a number of ways, because what do we see with things that are in conference or in division or Ivy compete? Rivalries, so when you get that high of beating out a rivalry, that does one thing, that puts one particular chip on your shoulder. But then again, to kind of break out the mold of just being an Ivy League school or just Ivy League good, I love that Turner said that nerds can hoop too, but that's what you're seeing. And especially her, she's such a complete player for this Harvard team. I mean, averaging north of 22 points, that's one thing, but then sitting north of 2.8 steals, like both sides of the ball she has a handle on. And then you mentioned IQ. The last couple of games, I kind of backtracked through some of the commentary and the highlights, and the biggest thing that they started to point out was the smart decision making in the middle of a game. And that's one of those things that kind of levels up your team over an opponent. It's having those quick reactions, those quick adjustments, and then having that basketball IQ. So yeah, maybe the Ivy League portion plays into it, but you're just seeing well-rounded athletes, and Turner is probably a leader in that category.
Definitely. And how well you can play when you get tired, right? Because a lot of these conference games, and now heading into March Madness, they're going to be tight. We always see, last second finishes, and it's really what players and what teams can play well and execute at a high level when they're just gassed and they're absolutely exhausted, and you're going into overtime and you're in the second half or the fourth quarter and all the things. And so I'm excited to see how Harvard can stand in this. But there's a really cool connection between this Harvard team and Michigan State's head coach Robin Freilich on the tournament. So here's what she had to say about the Crimson matchup.
Yeah, so Carrie Moore, I was a graduate assistant at Western Michigan when she was a player there, so that was a long time ago. And at that time, she was the leading scorer. I believe she was the leading scorer in the country. So great player, great person, great coach. She's done a really good job with Harvard. I think it's their first NCAA tournament, and it was a long time. So, and she just got there, so she's done a really good job. The seeding, I think we were all really anticipatory today because we were a team that kind of didn't know, exactly where we were going to land or end up. I had so many people ask me, where are you going to be? And I'm like, there's 16 different spots, we could be. And so I think right now we're just looking forward, and we've got Harvard to prepare for. And it's been a while since we've known who we're going to play. So I think we're eager to get prepared and get back to work.
It has been a while, like she said, since they've known who they're going to play, because they lost early in their conference tournament. And so just getting back on your feet has got to be hard, right? Like, it's hard to go a long time without playing games. But this is a team who is fifth in the Big Ten, in a very competitive Big Ten. So you got to imagine, maybe if UCLA wasn't in there, like maybe they'd be a little higher, right, kind of thing. But it is very exciting. And they have been, as much as they've been competitive in the Big Ten, those are also, harder matchups to go up against. And Harvard probably hasn't seen that level of competition besides their wins against Indiana and I believe Northwestern back in November, right? So it's like, yes, you've had these, high caliber wins, but those were in November. Can you still perform at that level and compete at that pace when we're in March?
Yeah, it's like we just talked about with South Carolina and UCLA, that timeline of like competing months ago versus like having that new compete now. What I will say, and I'm so glad you pointed it out, they kind of really haven't had to play much that often. And with that coming up, you're going against a Harvard team that, if we're going to give them a level up in this matchup per se, it's going to be their defense. It's going to be that they're in the category of maybe a top 15 team for full court press. They can force mistakes. They can create turnovers. And if you're going against a team that might take a minute to find their footing, if you come out as the stronger first quarter team, you're talking about a completely different level of play
back
here. Right, exactly. Like, hey, did you miss the game? Because we didn't miss you. But there's some pinpoints here where Harvard can try to take advantage for one, and you can tell that the leadership on that Harvard roster is going to push for that. Where the realistic concern comes in is that Ivy League-wise, you're talking about teams frame-wise that are a little bit on the smaller side. That's what kept popping up in their matchup versus Columbia. A small Columbia team, yeah, you're a little bit more quicker pace, but like you're going up against a big team that's going to be much more sizable, but they can force them to have a slower pace of game. So there's some mind games here. There's some meticulous things that Harvard can bring into this matchup, but that defense, that full court press, Turner with the steals, Rodriguez kind of helping out in that category as well with rebounds and stuff. Like they have an ability to force some mistakes on a team that's going to be, a little cold at first and take a minute to get their footing.
Mm-hmm. Well, here's the thing. If Harvard is able to overcome Michigan State, which it feels like from what you're saying they can with their skill set, I love how you talked about, the size and the bigs, because who's on their side of this tournament? UCLA with Lauren Betts, and that is a 6'7" post who is just thriving on all areas of the court. So yes, we don't want to get too far ahead. We're letting Harvard take care of the game in front of them. But like you said, that's a great point just about the competition that they will face and just the recruiting differences that you're able to have.
Yeah, and that's a good point to bring up UCLA, because how did UCLA get managed? How were they able to kind of be put on the fence there? It was because of the strong defensive play by USC. So Harvard having a strong defensive play, consistency in that category, I think that's what they're going to lean on heading into this matchup to hopefully create an upset and move along the bracketology lines here.
Well, good. Well, Harvard, please represent for Boston, for all of us here in the state of Massachusetts, as the only team in Massachusetts that will be in the March Madness tournament. And if you're enjoying the show, you can catch new episodes of Respect Her Game every Tuesday. You can watch on YouTube or Twitch and listen on Apple, Amazon, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts. Well, our Natalie Norrie caught up with Boston Fleet forward Jamie Lee Rattray on the season and how the team is really finding their groove right now. So here's Natalie on NESN.
We're joined by Boston Fleet forward Jamie Lee Rattray. And Jamie Lee, it's so exciting to have you on today. I have to say, our interactions around the rink are always some of my favorite, but it's great to have you on. Thanks for taking the time. And I guess we'll just start by saying, how are things? I think you've been able to stay at home the past couple of days. So how have things been for you?
Yeah, it's been really nice. I mean, like you said, feels like we've been on the road pretty much the whole season, and I think the schedule's been pretty hectic on the road, but it's been a lot of fun, right? I think you can kind of, as a team, bond on the road and things like that. But yeah, it's been really nice to be back in Boston and sleep in our own beds, and actually, it's been kind of like spring here, right? As you know, so it's been nice to kind of be here and enjoy the weather and cook some meals at home, which I really enjoy. So that's been a good part of it.
Yeah, the whole lifestyle kind of settles down when you're at home. I feel like when we talked to Coach Kessel about this, she said, I think we're excited to sleep in our beds for a consecutive amount of nights. But yeah, I think the last time I saw you was actually over at Agganis Arena. I think you were coming off the ice, and I was kind of tucked in a corner. It was funny. I felt like I was in a bit of a timeout. But just, the experience of that day was so much fun. And I guess just getting it from your perspective, what was it like to play at Agganis Arena and just in front of a sold-out crowd against Montreal?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a ton of fun playing in that rink, right? I think there's a lot of history in that rink being, where it is on the campus of BU. And I think a lot of us are really super excited just to play right in the city of Boston and represent well there. And I mean, our fans are so great anywhere we go, really, to be honest, even on the road. But I think the fans really loved being in that building, and it was super loud and a ton of fun. And I think too, right, like a great game against Montreal that goes to overtime, obviously we would have liked to win, but I think it was a good showing at BU and a ton of fun to be a part of.
Yeah, I feel like the win over Minnesota just in the past couple of weeks, within the last month, was kind of a nice catalyst for the team. Mm-hmm. You went on a little bit of a heater there, and then it kind of culminated at the game at the Agganis Arena. So where do you feel like your team has been lately? I feel like the scoring depth has kind of come out. Not only people putting the puck in the net, but also those who are dishing it out. Where do you feel the team is right now?
Yeah, I think we've really found our groove, right? I mean, sometimes it takes a couple games in a season, right? Obviously, with a season that only has 30 games, you'd like to do it quicker, right? But I'm really proud of our group. Like, I think we've just really figured out where everyone fits their roles, and everyone's really stepped up their game. And I think we get something we can be really proud of, our group. And I mean, obviously, we've had some great performances from individual players on individual nights, and I think that's the cool thing about our team is that you've seen players step up in big moments on different games, right? It's not always the same player over and over. I think it's been kind of a collective effort from everybody, and I think it's really fun to be a part of. And I mean, it kind of felt similar to last year, where we kind of really found our groove in the middle of the season, and I think we've just figured it out at the right time, and it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, kind of going back to that Aganis game, you scored a goal there with an assist from Lexia Gia and Jillian Dempsey. It seems like, a couple of players are also finding their way on the stat sheet as well, just kind of contributing here and there. When you think about that depth and just who has kind of stepped up lately, is there anyone that's been a lot of fun to play with or a lot of fun to see as they've taken these steps?
Yeah, I mean, I think you said Jillian Dempsey there. I mean, she's a local kid that grew up here, and she's really stepped up for us and stepped into a great role and been a great teammate for us. So I think that's someone that really sticks out to me, who has been really valuable to our group. And I mean, obviously, playing with everybody, but I think our line, Teresa Sapsel and Hannah Brandt and myself, we've been really great together. I've had a lot of fun playing with them, and we've kind of been able to kind of find our groove in terms of what we need to contribute to the team, whether that's maybe a good defensive shift or a good forechecking shift to set up maybe another shift for another line, or we've been able to produce a little bit in the last little bit, so that's been a lot of fun. But again, like, we've got such a great group that I think you can kind of throw anybody together and make it work, and I know those are just a couple that come to mind.
Yeah, when you think about the travel you mentioned that you had been doing throughout the course of the season, the PWHL Takeover Tour has been a lot of fun. It's taking you to different cities like Seattle, Buffalo. I know St. Louis is coming up. As far as where you've been able to play this year, are there any highlights that come to mind? I know you got to go to Pike Place and throw the fish and that kind of stuff. What were some of the highlights of the year just on the road?
Yeah, I mean, Seattle was super cool. I've been able to be there, play at Climate Pledge for a Rivalry Series game, and that was super fun. I just think it's obviously a newer arena, and kind of like if you walk into that arena, it just feels like futuristic, right? It's just kind of like a new arena that's really cool to be a part of. And then obviously Seattle is just a great city. And, Buffalo was super fun too, the one we had a couple of weeks ago. I'm a big Bills fan, so it was kind of fun to be in Buffalo and play there. And I don't know. I just think we've gotten to play in some really cool places this year, and you've seen it from the other teams as well, how much fun it's been to play in those different arenas. And I'm looking forward to St. Louis. I think it's going to be a lot of fun, and hopefully we get a good crowd there and put on a good show for them.
Yeah, looking ahead, I can't believe we're already at this point of the year, but 8 regular season games left at this point. You're on the road in Ottawa this weekend, and then you have essentially another road game, but although the one in St. Louis is on the road, you're technically the home team. So just looking ahead at this, it's kind of a big home stretch for your team. How do you think you can use that as a benefit as you're looking ahead to playoffs?
Yeah, I mean, I think this next stretch is really big for us. We want to find our groove, like continue to play well, and take the momentum into playoffs, like you said. And obviously, we would like to have a good run here heading into the international break that's coming up. So I think for us, just focusing one game at a time, right? I think when you're on the road like that, you kind of find your groove and find your routine that works. And now that we're at home, we got to find what routine works for us at home too. So I have no doubt that we will, and it'll be a lot more fun playing at home when you have fans cheering for you, for sure. But again, we really just want to make sure we're trying to get every single point we can down the stretch, because as you know, it's tight standings. I mean, every time you look at after every game, it seems to get tighter and tighter, and we want to make sure that we're getting every single point that we can. So it's on our group and our leadership group to make sure we're trying to do the best things to bring our group forward.
I think one of my favorite storylines throughout the year, I got to talk with Amanda Pelkey about her son, Levi, and how Levi's been able to travel with the team and, see him around the rink. And it's just been really cool. Aside from the merch that was just released for the pets, of course, we love the babies too. And we know that you and your wife are expecting a child. And I just want to, we talked about this on the broadcast earlier this year, but the moment that you were able to tell the team, can you walk us through that moment and just how exciting it was to see all of it come together and tell your friends?
Yeah, I mean, I think like anything, I think in hockey, I mean, it's about the connections you make and the people you've met along the way. And to me, a lot of my family and friends are in hockey, right? And I think that's kind of the special part about it. So, being able to share that news with, especially the girls here in Boston was super special. And seeing Pelkey and her wife come on the road with us and Levy and just, enjoy those little moments. I'm excited to, experience that myself next year. And it just shows how great hockey can be, right? The community of family. And I think our group, especially, we've been able to kind of rally around each other and not just on the ice, but off the ice. So it's pretty special. And obviously my wife and I are super excited for the summer and next year to be able to share those moments as well. And hopefully Levy has a nice little friend to play around with and he's not all by himself on the road. So it'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, you've been used to being a professional hockey player, and now you can add mother to the resume. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun to see that happen for you. And we appreciate you sharing your story and a little bit on the team this year. So thank you again for joining us. Jamie Lee Rattray, a forward with the Boston Fleet. And just so you know, the Boston Fleet are headed to Ottawa this weekend, facing off with Ottawa 2 p.m. on Saturday. Make sure you catch that game. And Jamie Lee Rattray on NESN. Well, thanks again, Jamie. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, guys. See you later.
If you're enjoying the show, you can catch new episodes of Respect Her Game every Tuesday. You can watch on YouTube or Twitch and listen on Apple, Amazon, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts. Well, Kasey, I love when we get to do Fleet interviews and hear from other people. So huge thank you to Natalie for grabbing that interview. But what did you like most about hearing from Jamie?
Well, as you said, first of all, a huge shout out to Natalie. Her coverage of the Fleet has been tremendous. Her coverage of the PWHL, but I remember chatting with her about like switching over from in-arena to rinkside, and the level of research and preparation is just so different. And I caught her at the Montreal-Boston game just the other weekend, and she's just like running, dipping and diving. So fantastic, Natalie. And then also great interview. What I loved about this interview was Jamie pointing out a couple of things, and I think we've talked about it here on Respect Her Game. The Fleet finding their footing, they're finding their identity. Each player is not only finding their role, but versatility to their role. If they need to switch things up, everybody is game to make sure that happens, and that they're not just doing it haphazardly. They're doing it with intention, and it counts. Something else that Jamie pointed out too is that now that everybody is finding more confidence and stride within their roles, they're also getting an ability to kind of like cement the best parts of their game. So they've now found their identity at probably the most perfect point of the season. They've changed their rankings around because of how well they're starting to play. Those comeback wins, those third period pushes, they jumped from a 4 ranking to a 2 ranking. But the biggest point out along the lines of all of this is like they're finally going to have some time to just be here in Boston. They've been on the road a lot. They've gone through a lot of travel adversity, and that it hasn't affected their game, but it just takes a while to really allow you to get into a rhythm. So to think that their game has just gotten that much better, their chemistry, their DNA as a team, and now they get to be home on home ice for a while in such a legendary arena, it's going to be crazy to see how much further their game can take off now that they're sitting on a number 2 slot.
Mm-hmm. Well, I loved how she did mention, we've been on the road, like you said, and as much as that is difficult with the things that challenge or traveling brings up, she said that we did get to bond. There was some good team bonding times, and she did find the positive part to that. But like you said, it's hard on your body. You're away from home. It just kind of gets your routine off. So I'm excited to see how they do with this now Boston home stretch. But like you said, the urgency that she said with finding their groove, like, yes, they found it, and that's so great, and that they're now really leaning into their roles individually. But there's a sense of urgency that I appreciated that she talked about, because they do have a shorter season. The playoffs are coming up, and so that is needed as much as it's like, okay, great, we can celebrate now that we kind of found our groove. She's like, well, no, we have a job to do, and it has to get done now.
Yeah, it's funny because as soon as I heard that too, like, it's like, no, we're not celebrating until we get to the postseason. We're not celebrating until we have an opportunity to, lift a trophy here. And the best part about the trajectory that this team has had is like they're biggest stalemate with any games that haven't gone their way is just finding that gelling moment. And if there was something to nitpick about the Fleet so that they could really anchor down that number 2 ranking and compete in the postseason, because, fun playoff structure, number 1 gets to pick between 3 and 4 rankings who they want to take on. The Fleet have found ways to be competitive, but they have to find ways to get into games much earlier than that second or third period. They do that, then they're looking at a team that can contend with the top, which is Montreal, and they're not far off. So they've got Toronto clipping at the heels, but that homestead that they have coming up is going to sell a lot. They've got Montreal, they got Toronto again, they've got Ottawa, whose number they've just kind of had this season, and a big win this previous weekend, 5-2 from them, and they get a back-to-back off of that, back to Toronto, and then they go on the road to Montreal one time before hosting Minnesota, which that was the tipping point in this season, getting past Minnesota, managing the speed over there, finding their identity in that game. Like, it's going to be funny to see that they close out the season versus them, and if they can hold down the number 2 spot.
Well, the league definitely did that too. They wanted to see Minnesota in the Fleet matchup again. They know what they're doing with that, but it's good.
Yeah.
We want to watch games that fans want to see, and emotions are probably high as well. But someone who has really been a leader for this team throughout the first inaugural season and this year is Hilary Knight. She had her 5th multi-point game in Saturday's 5-2 win over Ottawa, and this is what Courtney Kessel had to say about Hilary Knight and just her progression from last year to this year after their last game.
Yeah, I think last year there's a lot of things on Knight's plate. She's starting this league. She's trying to build a culture within a new program that's 26 women from across the world, and you put a lot on your shoulders to try and build this thing the right way, and I think it was heavy for her, and I think it'd be heavy for anyone, and I think this year she's settling in, she's enjoying the game again, and we have so much fun in the locker room, and I think she's just shining.
Well, it's good when your leader can enjoy the game and have fun. And, there's a lot that goes unseen that Hilary Knight probably takes on and feels the responsibility of by leading this team and trying to be one of those women who is really propelling the PWHL forward.
Right.
But it's cool to see her thrive on the ice as well. So just from your perspective, after hearing what Coach had to say about her, what do you think the key is for this Fleet team headed into the playoffs?
Oh, well, I think Kessel said it. First of all, you're talking about a leader that's establishing culture. Culture is going to dictate a lot. And culture also spills over into what we just talked about. DNA, that gelling, that identity. Once you know the identity of a team, then you just made yourself a formidable opponent. So Hilary finding and establishing her game, but more so being a leader to make sure that she's pulling everybody into this culture that they're establishing in the locker room. And it's all still very new, but to find it now and to have pieces that you can see kind of solidified on this roster for quite some time, then you're not only building something great for this season, you're building something that can go beyond this season. So I love that. And then what more do you want to see out of a leader who's not only building culture, has the perfect leadership voice and presence, but is also translating that onto the ice? I mean, had a hat trick on March 5th, had another multi-point game. She's a gamer. She's so hard to take out of the game. More importantly, she pulls everybody on that roster into the matchup with her, which is why they've probably had these tremendous comeback wins and fights, or push a lot of number of games into overtime and stuff like that. And a lot of that is pushed and prevailed by Hilary Knight.
Yeah, well, it's exciting, and I'm glad we have her here on the Boston Fleet because we get to be cheerleaders for her and the rest of the team. So we are spoiled to have Hilary Knight, and it's exciting. We're going to be cheering on the Fleet, and I'm excited to watch Natalie's coverage of it, for your coverage of it, and we will keep it up. But have to move on to women's pro soccer. The NWSL season kicked off over the weekend, and the two teams that we talked about last week on Respect Your Game both came out with the wins, the Washington Spirit and Orlando Pride. And just to start with the Orlando Pride, their game against the Chicago Stars, I went to check in on this game, and I was like, I wonder how Orlando did. And they didn't just win. They won big time. They won 6-0. And I had really not seen soccer scores that high in a minute, so rare. I was shocked that they won that big. And yes, they're the reigning champs. They're very good. But man, 6-0. They absolutely dominated. And they had the same lineup that they did against the Washington Spirit in the 2025 Challenge Cup. So you can definitely see they know what they're doing. They know how they're going to play. They're lucky they don't have a ton of injuries. But there were 19,000 fans in attendance.
I'm so happy to hear that. It's so crazy, especially as a girl who grew up playing soccer. But You hit it on the head. You don't see 6 goals that often in soccer. It's typically one of the most low-scoring sports out there, especially in a professional capacity. 21 goals over opening weekend. 21 goals. A number of draws, but you just see that Orlando kind of picked up where they left off. You put that perfectly. But the scary thing of what you saw in this Orlando matchup, first of all, Barbara Bando is just ridiculous.
3 goals. Wild.
Insane. And like, she's notably such a skilled player. She's notably such a strong scorer. But what you saw in that matchup for Orlando over the weekend was the fact that like she's changed her off-season training to where like she's not overly focused on being the scorer, on being the attacker. She started setting up her teammates for success, for opportunities, and for scoring chances. So when you have such a skilled athlete who can find that unselfish moment in a game, that's going to be crazy to see how Orlando develops and continues to build around that. I also think that they almost have one of those perfectly calculated rosters where they have the perfect veterans as well as like the perfect new blood blended in to make things happen. So from a leadership perspective, you have the right voices going on, and they got through the Bando in the off season for her to kind of curtail some things. So a strong, skilled, selfless player. Orlando's going to make some tremendous slides moving throughout this season.
Well, I love how you mentioned just the lineup and who they've really built this team on, because they have Morgan Gotra in the back, who has played on multiple U.S. women's national teams, championships, gold medals, world championships. You could name it, what she has in her trophy case. And so just to have that in the back, and then Barbara in the front, scoring goals. But then, like you said, that unselfishness. And there is a correlation to when you see your forwards and your strikers, and they are willing to have more assists and set their teammates up for success. Ultimately, what that does is it shows your other teammates, hey, I want you to succeed. It's not just all about me, which in turn allows you to get the ball back. And that's what we are seeing exactly with her. I mean, she even had some shots wide, and you can tell that unselfishness has definitely seeped into her play, because she looks like she's having so much fun. She shot, different shots wide. She's smiling, basically in this confidence of like, oh, I know I'm going to come and get it back.
Yes.
Not in that, like, when you mess up when you're like younger in sports and you kind of like laugh and you're like, oh, haha, like I didn't try that hard. This is not like I didn't try too hard. She is doing the smile like, oh, you just wait. I got real close and we might go up 8 goals and not 6 goals.
Yes. You describe the attitude so perfectly. And that's what makes her even scarier, because she's not a player that you see get in her head. You're seeing a player that can make course corrections on the drop of a dime. So, that's what I mean by like they're poised to be a dangerous team. And I love how you mentioned like the strength of the back end, because we talked a couple previous episodes ago, kind of the format some of these teams are going in with, and Orlando typically sticking to a 4-4-2. Sometimes you can have too many leaders in the center when you go with a 4-4-2 format. So like that can agitate your forwards and your strikers a bit. So you can tell that the communication is really strong and the dynamic is very good with this Orlando roster. And that's going to give them an upper hand on a number of these rosters that are typically on the younger side, still finding their identity, trying to figure out if they have the accountability in the center to run different formats. So yeah, Bando's going to be scary from a personality perspective, from a skill perspective, and then she has some of the strongest leaders in the game playing behind her.
Well, speaking of rosters with a lot of youth, there is one roster that has a lot of youth in Gotham FC with Mac Whitman. She's the youngest NWSL player in the league, in league history, and I just was not this cool in middle school. I don't know about you, but I mean, she is 14 years old and made her debut in opening weekend. So exciting for her. And yes, there actually are a lot of under 18 women who are in this league, but to be 14 and to be playing professional soccer, I mean, look at her. She's so sweet and so cute and so young. Casey, what do you think about having a 14-year-old in the NWSL?
I don't think I fully wrapped my head around it yet, because like you said, I mean, at that age, yeah, I was far from that cool. I was still trying to make suspenders happen and wear wetsuits.
That's all good. That's
all good. A little privy into Casey's life, but yeah, like you see a maturity to a lot of these players, and like the first thing that you notably see some of the girls under 18 do is spend time with the captain, spend time with the leaders on this team. And soccer isn't one of those like know your role. It's one of those like, what else can you bring to the table? Like, what package deal can you bring? What versatility can you bring? Can you be selfless? Like choosing your moments. So I think that when you're coming to this a bit younger, you're still in that stage where you're just like in awe. Like she was talking about how she was standing on the sideline, just like so ready for that moment, so ready for the tap, so ready for the call. And I think that sometimes brings like the best game forward. Like I started to overthink things a little bit more when I got to the collegiate level versus like when I was just younger and like, I just want to play footy. Everybody get out of my way. I want to have fun with this one. So she's going to bring a different energy to the roster. And that's what I think is so cool about having these young players and opportunities.
Yeah, like ignorance is bliss almost with her.
It is. It
like
really is.
Yeah, at the same time, she's played at such a high level. I mean, she trained with this team all of last year on their non-active roster through the 2024 season. So she has that experience.
Right.
She knows how competitive it is. She knows the speed of the game. She signed a Nike contract last year alongside like Caitlin Clark and others, which is super crazy and cool and just awesome for her. So she's definitely not new to it, but there is something to be said about just not having, the years on you and having gone through those relationships too, because it can be hard as well. Like, not only is this a high school club team, right? Or even talk about college club team, you're now in the professional world where there is money involved and roster spots. There's just a different tension when you get to that level. So I'm excited to see her and cheer her on. But man, like 14, I was going back trying to think what I was doing at age 14. And I honestly think I was also wearing suspenders or something like a sweater vest to school in middle school. Because
thank you for making me sound normal.
I was trying to, we're trying all the new fashion things, you're trying to figure it out. I think it was my first year without a school dress code was I was was around 14. So, it's the awkward stage, man. But
like you
clearly
said,
not
figuring it out. But you make a good point to mention like the different pressure points one's going to feel when you transition out of club focus to professional league focus. So a number of young teams in the league, a number of young players, and what you're also seeing is that some of these young players are getting the tap to kind of have more sustainable roles on these rosters. I know Angel City, big shout out to Sydney LaRue and her family. She made an announcement over the weekend that she's stepping away from soccer for her mental health. That's not an easy thing, especially when you're such a big veteran presence on a roster, but Alyssa Thompson, we're going to see her take that next step. Younger player, kind of how she's going to weather that pressure and not let things get in her head. And then kind of quick pivot to the Washington Spirit. They had a good standing this weekend as well. And what we're seeing out of them, and while we're probably going to end up seeing Orlando and Washington duke it out yet again towards the end of the season, they don't have their star players in the mix, and they had a great debut without their star players. We saw that they're probably the best depth ranked team in the NWSL right now. So much to look forward to.
So much to look forward to. And for Mac too, just like what you said with Sydney LaRue, like it's awesome for her to see older women in her league who are saying, hey, like I've been through a lot of soccer. I've seen the highs and I've seen the lows, and this is something that's okay to do. So it's really cool that she's coming into a time, especially around this, when there are, very high level competitive things that are going on, but then also women in the sport and in the league who are saying, hey, soccer is awesome and we want to win and it's all the things, but you as a human is more important than you as the athlete and the player. But this has been a very fun packed show of Respect Her Game. Glad that we aren't see-through today on the green screen, but excited to watch all the women's college basketball. Keep following up with the PWHL and the NWSL season. I'm Annabelle Hasselbeck here with Kasey Hudson. Thanks for watching another episode of Respect Her Game.